We need to learn how to minimize our footprint without minimizing ourselves. And I don't see that wind and solar and renewables have a practical chance of doing that, particularly given the fact that weather is changing constantly in the age of global warming.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to an author and screenwriter who has taken up the potentially poisoned chalice of popularizing nuclear energy for the world. Let's see what he is planning to share with us. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app. Share the love. Come join me on my Facebook group, The Rational View. I'd love to hear from you. The son of a career naval officer, Mike Conley has lived in Japan, Hawaii, and all over the U.S., and has backpacked through Thailand and Cambodia. Out for Blood is his first solo effort as a novelist. His screenplay, Wicked Wonderland, is based on the novel and has been optioned for feature production. As a lifelong science nerd, Mike became interested in nuclear power in 2010 and quickly saw that the field was in dire need of writers who could explain the technology to the average reader. So he joined the Thorium Energy Alliance, met dozens of scientists and engineers, and made them an offer. You explain it to me, and I'll explain it to the world. The first published book from this years-long effort will be Earth is a Nuclear Planet, and its short companion book, The LNT Report. The third book in the series, Roadmap to Nowhere, will be released in the fall of 2024. Power to the Planet will be the fourth book, to be released in 2025. The books are written for the non-technical reader as a basic but comprehensive and entertaining education in nuclear power, renewables, and energy-related issues. Mike, welcome to The Rational View.
No, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to show up.
So, what inspired you to track down nuclear energy and write about it? Why nuclear energy? Why did you get interested in this?
Well, in the late 90s, I came across an article in Scientific American. It's probably a very famous article. It's called The End of Cheap Oil. And it basically popularized, if that's the right word, normalized the concept of peak oil. And it's still an entirely valid concept. The idea being that at a certain point, we're going to run out of drilling for cheap oil, where back in the 20s, it took like $1 to get $50 worth out of the ground. And now it takes like, $20 to get $40 worth, or some sort of big change. And that has been moderated by shale oil, which came up after I read that article. But all it did is it moved that big hump of a graph farther in time. But this existing, the situation is still the same. There's a finite amount of fossil fuel. And this planet runs on fossil fuel. Maybe it shouldn't, but it does. And so we have to rethink entirely our energy systems, as we all know now. And so for several years, I was like really existentially bummed out, like all this is going to end, that whole Mad Max thing. And then I was cruising around the internet late one night, and I stumbled upon stuff about molten salt reactors. And it was just a ray of hope. Molten salt reactors are elegantly simple, brilliant designed by the same guys that co-invented the light water reactor that we all know and love, or all know and hate, depending on what side of the fence you are on it. And it's sort of like their reactor 2.0. And fantastically brilliant, stupid, simple design. It really is. I mean, it is as different as an internal combustion engine to an electric motor. It's just like, wow. So I got really charged up with that, and I started hanging out with the Thorium Energy Alliance people, and I basically told them, you explain it to me, and I'll explain it to the world, because these scientists, a lot of them don't know how to write. Sorry,
So there's a lot to dig
true.
into there for what you said, and I'd like to come back to a lot of that.
Oh, sure. Okay.
But so you've been involved with the nuclear community for almost 15 years now. After all this time, do you consider yourself to be an expert on the topic?
People call me that. I guess you'd be called sort of an uncredentialed blue collar expert, sort of like a plumber who's hung around and built enough stuff to really sort of understands hydraulic engineering, but he doesn't have a degree. He just knows how it all works. So as far as the functionality and the basic beats of the science, I have down, because basically I picked the brains of credentialed scientists for years, going, well, what do you mean by that? And how come it boils there? And what the heck is a coefficient of, what did you call it anyway? And why do you call it that? And basically I force them to explain it to me. And then I go, aha, now I got it. Now I can explain it to the world, that kind of a thing. So it's been kind of a fun process, like, what's a fast reactor? Why do they call it a fast reactor? So the other ones are slow. They're all running at the same speed. I don't get this, that kind of thing. And they break it down and I go, okay, that's simple. Why don't you just say so in the first place? And then that's where I come in. So,
So tell me a little bit about the title of your book. Why is Earth a nuclear planet? Why is Earth a nuclear planet?
Well, as we were writing the book, we originally wrote it, the original title was Fear of a Nuclear Planet, and the purpose of the book was to clear up all the the major misconceptions and fears and concerns that people have about nuclear. And the more we got into it, the more we had this epiphany that this actually is a nuclear planet. Well, what do we mean by that? About at least half of the heat in the Earth's core is from radioactive decay and from some fission. Okay. Without that heat, the core would not be molten. Without a molten circulating core, we wouldn't have a magnetosphere. Without a magnetosphere, the solar wind would rip away our atmosphere and we wouldn't have any oxygen.
Wow.
And without that, we wouldn't have any life. Mars is a perfect example. Mars' core cooled, and as a consequence, the solar wind stripped away whatever atmosphere used to be there. Okay. And so we actually literally physically would not freaking exist if this was not a nuclear planet. And so rather than being afraid of or unduly concerned about the very material that allows us to have life on this planet, we should learn how to harness it and use it profitably and not chew up the rest of nature to keep the lights on.
It's a very good perspective, because I know a lot of the people who are against nuclear energy are kind of like part of the nature fallacy, right? Return to nature fallacy. And technology is evil, and we should have natural forms of energy like wind and solar, which are quote unquote natural, whereas radiation for some reason is treated as unnatural. And in all these cases, you still need the infrastructure to harness these energy forms. So I don't feel like any of these don't need technology to go forward.
Well, the whole thing about like get back to nature, even Thoreau in Walden Pond said that he needed civilization to make his axe so he could live at a green and clean and noble arm's length away from civilization. He needed some accoutrements. This approach that people have about, we should go back to nature. Have you ever seen an old lion stumbling through the forest waiting to get eaten by younger animals? I mean, it's like we put that concept aside when we stepped out of the cave. And what we need to do is we need to learn how to minimize our footprint without minimizing ourselves. And I don't see that wind and solar and renewables have a practical chance of doing that, particularly given the fact that weather is changing constantly in the age of global warming, and we can't even predict the weather a week from now. Like, remember those hurricanes back in 2017?
Yes,
Like
yes.
Irma and whatever, Rosemary or whatever it was. We couldn't see that stuff coming a week ahead of time.
True.
And we're
Yep.
supposed to predict weather 30 to 60 to 80 years in the future, because if we're going to spend a couple of $1 billion planting wind somewhere, it better be a windy area years and years and years and years from now. And we can't freaking predict the weather,
Mm,
you
mm.
know? And I looked at Mark Jacobson's plan, the big guru of 100% wind and solar, and his plan, his modeling is based on 3 years of weather data from, I think, the Pacific Northwest. And it's like, well, was that El Nino or La Nina?
And how representative is it of the future as well?
Well, and on top of it, how representative is of the future? I mean, South Florida right now is beating weather all-time weather temperatures, and it's only May. You know, the king tides are already flooding Miami streets. You got hailstorms beating the hell out of solar panels. I think it is fundamentally, philosophically, a bad idea to depend on the whims of Mother Nature to have a weather dependent energy system in a future of unpredictable weather. It's just a fundamentally boneheaded idea. Pardon my French, but I think it's a boneheaded idea. I was like, oh yeah, we don't know what the hell the weather's going to be 50 years from now, so let's guess and put up a bunch of solar here and a bunch of wind there and hope for the best, you know. And
okay, but there's people are afraid of nuclear power, though. Like, why are so many people afraid of nuclear energy? You know, Chernobyl, and you know, is still in everyone's mind decades later, and was, you know, rekindled by Fukushima, and you know, started by 3 Mile Island and movies like China Syndrome. Why are so many people deathly afraid of nuclear energy, and is this a reasonable thing to be considering when you're advocating for nuclear power everywhere? Because obviously there's going to be more.
Fear and caution are two different things. Reasonable, rational caution is always entirely appropriate. But nuclear power has been made into a alchemist boogeyman from the beginning. Part and parcel of it is because it's so energy dense. Okay. Human beings are used to working with wood and gasoline, and they sort of get a basic idea about, well, if I have a thimbleful of gasoline, I can spill it on the table and light it, and it'll be fun, but it won't burn the house down, you know, unless I'm really stupid. But it's like nuclear power is so far more energy dense that it's like, it's like Superman looking at kryptonite. Okay. Number one. Number two, it really pushes some very, very deep Jungian psychological buttons in the human psyche of the alchemist playing with the building blocks of Mother Nature. And people also instinctively understand that the power to save the world can be the power to destroy the world. And the nice thing about wind and solar is it's not going to like destroy the world, other than gobbling up the natural resources in order to build all the stuff. But it's a safe technology, but at the same time, it's not an effective, comprehensively effective technology. And how dangerous is that? You see? And so I think that, the benefit, risk benefit situation has been deeply skewed with nuclear. And one of the big things that a sequence of events that happened for about 1945 to 1960 is like, we set off the bombs in Japan to end the war, or to think we were going to end the war by doing that, whatever. There's a bunch of reasons. That's a whole discussion in itself. Anyway, we set off the bombs, freaked the hell out of people. People saw the power of it. Oh my God. And then at the same time, there was this guy named Herman Muller, a prominent scientist, who came to the erroneous and frankly false conclusion, and I think he knew it was false, And his idea was there is no safe dose of radiation. And the companion idea was that all doses are cumulative. Now, if you accept those as true, the obvious rational solution is to minimize all radiation sources that you possibly can, hence reactors, fuel, of course, the bombs. I think atomic bombs are political weapons. They're not military weapons, but that's another discussion in and of itself. The point being is that Mueller demonized all radiation, okay? Interestingly enough, I mean, his ideas were basically ignored by the nuclear science community, nuclear medicine community, and nobody is like going to them going, "Oh my God, you gave that person a smidgen of radiation. We need to shut down your facility."
Well, they do that with the lead vests and everything, and running out of the room.
And the lead vests have been lead vests are they're basically BS, bad science. The whole lead vest thing, the amount of radiation delivered in an X-ray. I'll give you a good idea. The amount of radiation delivered in an X-ray. Well, I'll flip it around. People were flipped out about 3 Mile Island. The average downwind dose was less than 1 human chest X-ray. But but built on the idea, the false idea that there's no safe dose of radiation. They had 300, Jane Fonda and Emerson and Crosby, Stills and Nash and James Taylor and all these groovy people that I like. They whipped up. They had a concert tour, no nukes. They had 300,000 people attend around the United States, and I'll bet you that in one of those events, somebody went up the microphone and went, "Oh, by the way, did you know that 3 Mile Island it amounted to an unscheduled chest X-ray? Now here's Jackson Brown." I mean, there was no perspective given, and it became an absolute evil and an absolute it's like subatomic Ebola. You can't get one little smidge or you're doomed.
It's true that this is out there, and the linear no threshold theory of every little bit of radiation is dangerous and cumulative is a thing, and it's controversial because it's difficult to get data at these very low volumes, and nobody gets cancer till 20 years later anyways. So it's not like you're going to have no confounding factors in 20 years from tiny doses, right? It's so hard to get the science. But I just want to say that, contrast that with fossil fuel burning, which everyone accepts as the status quo, and the particulate exhaust from coal burning in the atmosphere, we also know kills people, and in doses that are present in all of our cities right now at levels that are more dangerous than in the Fukushima prefecture. So now we know that our cities have more mortality from people living in our cities right now are going to be dying at higher rates than if they had moved to Fukushima because of the particulate exhaust, and nobody is upset about this. So that's the question that kills me, is that the rational benefits of one, even if you accept linear no threshold, it's still better. Why is that message not out there? And to your point,
3 Mile Island, 3 Mile Island freaked out America, and it had a lot to do with making nuclear unpopular. And the idea of building out coal plants was far more acceptable. 3 Mile Island was a chest X-ray. I'm sorry, but it was a chest X-ray. That's it. Yep. Okay. And people flipped out about nuclear power because of 3 Mile Island, and coal plants were built out instead. And since then, at least 1 million Americans have had their deaths hastened by coal. But it's like, you understand coal. You can put, coal and charcoal in a barbecue and light it, and people have truck with it. The way people have truck with internal combustion engines and gasoline and all this other stuff, and so people are familiar with it, but they don't know, they can't do anything with nuclear stuff. And the people who can are using it to do this incredibly dense, powerful things that, oh my God, if something goes wrong, humans instinctively know that if a powerful source goes bad, it could be more dangerous than a less powerful source. And so it's the fear that got ramped up with the whole linear no threshold, meaning there's no safe dose, there's no threshold dose below which you're cool, that everything leads to a bad result, and it happens linearly. You double the dose, you double the risk, you double the dose, you double the risk. That's linear. It's in a straight line. The problem is that Mueller in the 20s, he examined high dose results on fruit flies. And yes, at a certain dose rate, you're going to get weird stuff happening to fruit flies. He extrapolated a straight line down to zero with no evidence in the low dose range and declared it a linear concept all the way down to zero dose.
It's the precautionary principle, right?
The precautionary principle kind of like grew out of that or was applied to that. And the precautionary principle actually became popularized. He called it his proportionality rule. And it was later called LNT, linear no threshold. The precautionary principle was an outgrowth of something that Ed Lewis came up with in the mid 50s, which is like the summer after Mueller stuff hit the scene. Ed Lewis hit the scene with another even scarier thing, which we can get into the details. But basically, Ed Lewis advised Congress. He goes, well, it seems, and this is like just about a direct quote. Well, it seems to me that we have effects in the high dose range, and we should assume that they continue down into the low dose range. Mm-hmm. And of course, the precautionary principle is, well, we're not sure what's happening down there, but there's scary stuff happening up here. So we better presume, in the absence of evidence, that these bad things continue. Aspirin is a good example about why that's BS, bad science. Eat a bottle of aspirin, you're going to have trouble. Eat one a day and you're fine. So there's a threshold dose for aspirin ingestion. In the same way, there is a provable threshold dose for radiation intake or absorption, and there's no provable, there's nothing that has proved the linear no threshold, but there's tons of stuff that have disproven it. But linear no threshold took hold and became chiseled in stone, and our main radiation regulations are all balanced on this presumption without proof of harm in lower doses. And that's what the book, the LNT report, goes into. It's a deep dive into the history of LNT, and it's a short book. And so that's the second book. In fact, I just finished the manuscript the other day. So
nice. I mean, I think scientifically there's no proof either way, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think there's data that supports that there is a threshold. There's data that supports in some cases that it's linear to lower doses. I don't think it's a solved problem. And I think we just have to be aware of that. But I think the conclusions that we should reach as a rational society, even if we assume the LNT, is still that nuclear is better than coal.
Oh, sure. That's unquestionable. And I agree with you. That's puzzling that people will go, well, there could be radiation problems at low doses, so we'll use coal.
Yeah.
Well, that's a solution.
I interviewed Dr. Philip Thomas on his work with the J factor, which was basically like a way to quantify the impact of radiation lives lost in terms of life expectancy, and some of the regulations that were put in place after Chernobyl, like not selling lamb meat from Scotland after the Chernobyl, saved something like the most frequent lamb eater in the world. If you had lamb every day of your life expectancy would have gone down by a few minutes. So
Lord God Almighty, stop eating lamb.
This regulation.
Oh, Jesus, I'm so glad we figured this out before millions of people are dropping like flies or eating lamb.
Thousands of farmers to save what? It's just not.
Yeah. To lose what? Yeah. How many family fortunes went down the drain because these family farms had to get rid of all their sheep because, recently the whole thing with Chernobyl, Um, mushrooms absorb radioactive nasty stuff that fall in fallout. Boars eat mushrooms. Boars have radioactive meat. Well, how radioactive?
Yes.
You'd have to eat 17 kilos in one sitting to equal the radiation you get on the flight from here to Germany to go to Oktoberfest to have all that pork. You know,
and if you're going to Oktoberfest to have alcohol, that's in orders of magnitude worse than having
exactly.
Sort of
exactly. But there's this absolutism that's tied in with radiation that is directly comes from Muller's linear no threshold, and that absolutism skews the human's ability to look at things in proportional risk and proportional benefit, and it's sort of like the absolute. Being an absolute just pulls it out of the discussion, and it's not sensible to do that. And so you have a lot of unsensible concern. Give an example, the Fukushima tank water. Everybody's seen the photographs of the tanks at Fukushima, right? We had Philip Holt run some pharmacological calculations on that, some differential equations and stuff. And he determined that you would have to drink 1/2 shot of that water every single day for the rest of your life. And all it would do is match the radioactivity from the potassium that is already in your body as a normal part of your dietary makeup. Okay. And that water has been, as everybody knows, has been this big whoop-de-doo thing in the press for months and months, if not years and years. And they're going to dilute it with seawater like 53 or 56 times. And now they're all worried about, well, the fish this and the fish that. And that doesn't make any sense either, because the way a fish's biochemistry works, there's no more tritium inside its body than in the surrounding water that it swims in. And so you trace down all this stuff, and it's nonsense. They're trying to lower the radioactivity of the downwind farmland in Fukushima to 1 millisievert over background radiation. Japan has 2 millisieverts a year background, so they want to lower that farmland to 3 millisieverts, and they're spending billions doing it, and they're displacing thousands of people who are frittering their lives away in temporary housing to get it from down to 3 millisieverts background radiation. If the farmers moved to Denver, the background radiation would be 7 millisieverts. Okay.
Yes.
So it's
unrealistic and
it's silly. Horrible. Yeah. It's all predicated on irrational nuclear fear. And you can't speak sensibly to people because they're like, oh my God, zoomies. It's like, calm down, dude.
The problem is that the scientists don't have the trust of the populace either, right? There seems to be a trust issue that's, because over the years, people have made mistakes. So, it's an actual fact that people don't trust scientists. And so you're saying this, but it's like you're a brick wall. There's this barrier of trust behind it. So I'm happy that you as a popular writer are tackling this issue. Maybe from your perspective, you have the ability to change more minds than someone like me yelling facts, for example.
Well, I do yell a lot of facts in the book, but we start out with an analogy about airplane flying, riding in an airplane. Since 1980, there's been I think it's since 1980 or 1970, there's been something like 80,000 lives lost in airplane crashes. Boeing right now is having all sorts of problems. But I'll note that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of commercial flights are still booked every day on this planet because people accept the risk. They have the willies flying, but they sort of swallow their fear and step over the threshold and get on board. But when it comes to radiation, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, do a full body search because I'm not going to let that machine put one nasty zoomie into my body. And you get zoomies in your body from eating a banana.
Yeah,
I'm still a bit mystified over how and this is a hazardous statement about sort of like manufactured ignorance. Okay. People are actually rather sensible creatures if you can give them facts to work with, but you can manufacture ignorance with a lot of scary lies, and it's been done with nuclear power. And quite frankly, I think it has. It was pushed by the oil industry.
I see some parallels to the discussion about fluoridation of water. Like fluoride is rat poison, basically, at high levels, and at low levels, it's good for your teeth. And nuclear radiation is similarly. We know it's bad for you at high levels, but at low levels, some people would say it can actually help you. It stimulates the body's immune systems. It's a very similar argument, but I find that politically, the left is in favor of fluoridation of water, but against nuclear energy. So it's interesting how these areas of low dose toxicology break down in the discussion, and it's not always the same way.
Yeah, there seems to be a double standard going on. It's okay to entertain certain amount of toxins. Well, again, aspirin is a great example. You will probably have a really, really bad day if you eat a whole bottle of aspirin. But you can take one every day for the rest of your life and you can be fine. Relate that to radiation. People cannot get their minds around it. I think a lot of it is an outgrowth over radiation being inextricably and unfortunately tied to nuclear weapons, because the first real experience that society had with nuclear was in the form of weapons and not power. And I wonder, like what if the first experience we had with petroleum was like napalm being used in the Civil War to horrific hundreds of thousands of people burned to a crisp situation in trenches, and then you go, oh, let's use it in automobiles. It's like, wait a minute, that was the stuff that burned a whole troop full, whatever, some horrific thing, and it's sort of like the foot that we started off on. Nuclear started off on a bad foot, and just the exigencies of history, So statistically, it's easily provable that nuclear power is far safer than any petroleum methodology, and far more reliable than any weather-dependent energy harvesting system.
You started out as joining the Thorium Energy Alliance. This is kind of a particular new proposed method of generating energy, another type of fission than uranium, using a different rare earth element that's a little bit more. There's a little bit more of it in the Earth's crust, but it's a little bit harder to make it fuse. One of the hazards of getting involved in what I would say is a polarizing field such as nuclear energy is the social discussion focuses maybe an out of proportion amount of time on sexy ideas like thorium or molten salt or fusion, for example, which get maybe more limelight than workhorse stuff like plain old uranium fission. Where do you see the future? What should we be focusing on?
Quite frankly, I think that good old solid fuel light water reactors are going to be around for probably till the end of the century. Anything we build now will last till the end of the century. So you got to fuel it. All right. That means you got to fuel it with fresh uranium. Okay. And that means you got to mine it. You got to leach it out of the ground, or what I suggest and would strongly recommend is we finalize the R&D on seawater uranium harvesting and we commercialize it. Because there's 4.5 billion tons of fresh uranium floating around in the oceans. And it's renewable. Why do I say that? Because if you take uranium out of the sea, seawater chemistry leaches the same amount of uranium out of the rocks and river silt. And so it's a steady state supply, and that's about as renewable as you get. Okay? We now have all sorts of global, difficulties with Russia. Kazakhstan is a vassal state of Russia. Half of the uranium produced on this planet comes from Kazakhstan. Joe Biden just put on some sort of restriction about importing uranium from Kazakhstan. So we're trying to build out a nuclear grid, and uranium supplies are being restricted, which jacks up the price. And you get all these market shenanigans and investments and pump and dump and whatever. And all of that can be completely circumvented by just simply going down. We have 3 shores, right? Should be going down to the ocean and harvesting some seawater uranium out of the seawater with reusable, cheap, eco-friendly synthetic sponges. And the India is developing even more efficient methods and getting and uranium is uranium is uranium. It's just a freaking element, and we can get the same fresh uranium out of seawater that we can get out of mining. And quite frankly, and I gave a speech on this at the last Thorium conference, that embarrassingly, nuclear might have a super low finished material throughput, but our raw material throughput is actually twice that of wind and solar, because the amount of mining that has to be done to get the uranium to fuel our machines. And this is even when you include or give a discount for the uranium that is leached out of the earth rather than mined out of the earth. The pile of raw material waste is still ginormous. And you can cut that down to the same level of wind and solar by recycling all used fuel once, or you can just get it down to 0 by going to seawater uranium. And then we have a throughput, a material throughput that is maybe 10% of what wind and solar could even ever hope to achieve, even by fully recycling their material.
Wow.
And so basically the big difference is the mining, and we have to get rid of uranium mining. Either that or you go to advanced reactors that can burn used fuel for another round or 2 or 3 of energy, But as far as good old Gen 3 uranium, Generation 3 uranium fuel reactors, you need fresh uranium. And most of the new Generation 4 designs require fresh uranium as well. So it's going to be on the menu for decades.
Yeah.
And we have to address the problem.
Well, this has been a great discussion, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your new book. Looking forward to getting a copy of that and looking through it.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.